Hi everyone and welcome to Protocol 36, and in today's video we'll be discussing how the fates of the past Spider-Man villains were changed in Spider-Man No Way Home. Since people were pretty confused about it, so I made this video to clear some things up. And there will be spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home, so if you haven't seen it yet, please do so and then come back to the video. But if you have at any point you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you could drop a like, as that would really help out the channel. Thank you. Now let's get into this. With all three Spider-Man curing the villains and Doctor Strange sending everyone back to their own realities, it did lead to a few people questioning if the villains were cured towards the ending of the film, would that affect or even change the prior Spider-Man films before that? Would that mean that the Spider-Man movies from the first film by Sam Raimi in 2002 all the way till the Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't happen? Well, yes and no. If you remember in Loki, it was explained that if a character were to create a Nexus Event, it would create a different branch timeline, separate from their main reality, leading to them becoming variants. And Avengers Endgame explained that if you were to try and change the past, which in this case would be curing the villains so that they can become their normal and human selves, it will create a different branch timeline that will change what happened in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man duology, and will create different timelines that were almost identical to the worlds they came from, but all of them were given a second chance so that some of them do not die or even end up killing people. So a character like Electro, who was cured thanks to Doc Ock using the device Tom Spider-Man created and later repaired, making Max Dillon no longer Electro. When Doctor Strange sent him back to the Amazing Spider-Man universe, it created a timeline where he was still alive, and what happened towards the ending of that film would slightly change. Well, Gwen might even be alive, but it would create another branch timeline where Max would still be around. For Lizard, even though we know that he never died in the Amazing Spider-Man 1, nobody in the film, with the exception of Andrew Spider-Man, knew his fate, and possibly even Electro too, leading to him also being cured, which created a timeline where he never tried to turn everyone in New York into lizards and kill George Stacy, which would also lead to Captain Stacy to never find out that Peter is Spider-Man, but still think that he's a vigilante, as he would never be able to prove to him that he's a hero, trying to do the right thing, at least for a long time, assuming he does eventually find out. But him and Gwen would most likely stay together, and they wouldn't always break up and get back together until the events of the Amazing Spider-Man 2. So with George still being in the picture, we would have a completely different side of the Amazing Spider-Man universe, assuming Gwen didn't die in that future, and Dr. Connors would most likely be in prison or rehabilitated instead of becoming a lizard again. For Sandman, aka Flint Marko, I think it's safe to assume that that version of the character is from the exact same timeline as Tobey's Spider-Man, as when Flint was talking to Tom Holland's Peter when he was fighting Electro, he calls him by his first name and even asked if he remembered him, suggesting that not only did Peter forgive Sandman towards the ending of Spider-Man 3, but may have also stayed in touch since then, but didn't talk for a while. For Marko being from the same timeline as Tobey, it most likely wouldn't create another branch timeline, but allow him to pick up where he left off, and be able to spend some time with his daughter Penny, which apparently she's still around, which is good to hear. For the two biggest villains in No Way Home, it would definitely create branch timelines for each of them. Like for Otto, who would be brought back where he left, in the moment where he had Tobey's Peter Parker by the throat, I was minutes away from being redeemed. But in this case, since thanks to MCU Spider-Man, he was able to make a brand new chip for Ock so that he would go back to his former self. But since the fusion reactor was self-sustaining, Otto would still try and stop it, of course. But this time I don't think he would die, since some people did point out that Doc Ock still had the arc reactor he took from Electro, so I wouldn't be surprised if he used it in a way which would help him stop it. And since Green Goblin cut off one of his metal limbs, I think Tobey from that timeline would try and help him out, which would lead to all of them being alive and the city still being safe. Otto would most likely go to prison after everything he did in Spider-Man 2, which he would understand and surrender willingly, but could eventually get out, and when he does, he would be able to have a second chance as MCU Peter promised him. And for Norman, since he was cured from the Goblin Serum, which not only gave him his powers but also his Green Goblin identity, allowing him to still be alive of course, and spend time with his son Harry, as he promised him before he kidnapped Mary Jane, which then would mean Harry wouldn't be obsessed in trying to get revenge on Spider-Man, or even become the new Goblin in Spider-Man 3 and try and kill Peter. In that timeline, he most likely wouldn't have even funded Otto's fusion reactor, as Norman would still be CEO, assuming the board hasn't tried to fire him yet again, and the Oscorp is still thriving under his leadership. I think there's a high chance that Norman was taken into the MCU before he kidnapped Mary Jane, but of course after the Thanksgiving scene, which was when he found out who Spider-Man was. So if that's the case, MJ would still be safe and may have even gotten with Peter, assuming she still confessed her feelings towards him, which then, because she wasn't in danger to begin with, Tobey's Peter would say yes, and there would most likely be a couple way sooner than the original timeline. So out of the other timelines, I think it's safe to say that this one would have changed the most. I heard some people think that when Norman went back, he would have been stabbed by his own glider in Spider-Man 1, which is why he said "oh" before he was stabbed. But I don't think so, since he had tons of gear on and looked completely different at the end of No Way Home. Plus, it would have just defeated the purpose of the film, which was to save them and make sure that they had second chances, so that some of them do not die or continue on being villains. villains. But yeah, because each of the villains were changed back to their former selves, so when they went back to their own universes and timelines, it would have created different futures for them and would not alter each other's past. Like how in Doc Ock's new timeline, Otto would still be dead and the events of Spider-Man 1 would still happen. Same for Sandman, as both Otto and Norman would still be dead where he came from. And the same goes for Electro and Lizard, but there will always be a version of them that will be alive and got to be normal after No Way Home, which would also mean both Tobey and Andrew's movies would still remain untouched, as those events already happened to them, but they would know that they were able to save versions of their villains and were able to change their fates. I hope that makes sense for all of you. If not, I'll try to explain it better in the comments. But either way, let me know your thoughts about this below. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, and one more subscribe. To begin, Protocol 36.